The debate for the state is sponsored by AARP Alaska. Be the difference. Vote. Alaska Public Media and Channel 2 News present Debate for the State, the U.S. House candidates. Here are your moderators, Lori Townsend and Mike Ross.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us for Debate for the State. We are coming to you live from Alaska Public Media here at Anchorage. I'm Mike Ross.
And I'm Lori Townsend. Tonight we will pose a series of questions to the two major candidates for Alaska's lone seat in the U.S. House of Representatives, Republican Don Young and Independent Elise Galvin. Welcome to you both.
Thank you.
In addition to Lori and I, reporters Liz Ruskin and Rich Maurer are here to ask follow-up questions or dive a little deeper into a subject when they think it's warranted. We'll also feature video questions from the communities of Anaktuvik Pass and Girdwood.
All questions and answers will be timed. The candidates also will be given the opportunity to ask questions of each other during the debate. Candidates will start with a 1-minute opening statement. The starting order was determined by a coin toss. Let's get started. Mr. Young, your 1-minute opening statement, please.
Thank you. I want to thank KAKM, and I want to thank my wife and my daughters who are watching the show. And Ross, I'll thank you. This is a great event for me. This is my 24th I would call discussion over the years with KAKM. As everybody knows, I've been representing the state, yes, for a long time because I've been able to do the job, and we have an election every 2 years. This is crucial these next 2 years because we made great progress this last 2 years. So next 2 years, we ought to be able to make more. My main goal is, of course, defending the Second Amendment. My fight to make sure we have access to federal lands, and we have the ability to have a state of Alaska as my original forefathers in this state thought, that we'd have an opportunity to develop our land, an opportunity to have cooperation with the federal government, and we lost that 8 years ago, and we're getting it back now. I'm quite proud of that effort. I've worked very hard to make sure it continues. I'll continue to do that if you reelect me. This is not about Don Young. It never has been. It's about who can best do the job. If you look at the record, I've done it. I'll continue to do it.
Thank you, Mr. Young. Ms. Galvin, your 1-minute opening statement, please.
Thank you so much. My name is Elise Galvin, and I'm running for Congress. I'm an independent. I'm a mother of 4. I'm a former small business owner, manager of a large hotel, and also a community leader. I'm running because we have some challenges ahead of us. Highest healthcare costs in the world per capita. We have twice the national average of unemployment. We also have issues around sexual assault, domestic violence, and public safety. In fact, those numbers are unconscionable. I'm going to bring new, enthusiastic leadership that I think is necessary because, unfortunately, old solutions to these challenges are not working. I can't wait to be that fighter and bring the enthusiasm that I brought to Great Alaska Schools, leading a group from 40 to over 4,000 to stand up for each and every child in public education to have a quality public education. Thanks so much, and I can't wait to earn your vote.
We're starting off tonight with a question that is from today's headlines. Now, this week, more than a dozen suspected pipe bombs were sent to prominent Democrats and CNN. An arrest was made in that case today. Now, in recent months, Republican senators and members of the Trump administration have been heckled and chased out of restaurants. As a member of the U.S. House, how would you dial down the hate between the left and the right? Ms. Galvin, you're first.
Thanks so much for addressing this problem in a question tonight. I think that all of the hate and the emboldening of that hate and those actions is horrible. And frankly, that's part of why I'm running. As an independent, I am one who will bring to the table that willingness to get to solutions together. I think it's time to have somebody representing Alaska who is going to model that sort of civility that we all are comfortable with and that we all know also leads to solutions. Thank you.
Mr. Young?
Well, this news has been, I think, bad for the United States internationally and for everybody in the United States, the hostility. And people are pointing fingers at one another. You see pictures of Maxine Water. If you watch it all on your television station, you see pictures of other people. A lot of blame is going on, a lot of pointing of fingers. I'm one and been rated as one as the most bipartisan across the aisle individual in the 5% that gets things done. I am civil to my members. I work hard for Alaska. I will continue to do that. This is not going to be solved by one person. It's going to be solved by a collective effort. It might help us a little bit if we start reading the Bible too. And I say that with some reservations. Some people say, oh, he's bringing religion into it. Let's understand how we must work together as individuals, as God's created us. So I'm excited about looking for this next year. I won't be able to solve all the problems that some people say they're going to, because this is a national issue. It's even exists in the state of Alaska, but more so on the national level, because I very frankly think it comes from a lot of the national media.
Turning our attention to the topic of immigration now, a caravan of several thousand Central Americans is now in southern Mexico, making its way north on foot with the stated goal of entering the United States. What do you think President Trump should do about this, and why? Mr. Young.
This is an issue President Trump's been charged with. He's right, this is an invasion. How we're going to stop it, I'm not sure. He is not sure himself. We are putting troops on the border. But they have 10,000 people come to this nation illegally. There'll be 20,000 the next time. So it's an issue that Congress itself should be addressing. We have not addressed the immigration laws. We have not built the wall. Some people want to build a wall right now that wouldn't stop this migration of this one caravan. But we have to recognize this is a challenge to the people of the United States, and we better accept that challenge and say, you can't be in the United States unless you're legal. And that's very, very crucial to the United States if we're to remain as America. This is about America. So I'm working with the President, I'm working with the Congress to come up with a solution. I don't have all the solutions to it. I don't know what's going to happen when those people arrive at the border, how they're going to handle it. That's going to be the big, big enchilada when that happens.
Ms. Galvin?
The issue of immigration has been on the table for decades, and it never got solved, unfortunately. We are a nation of immigrants. I'm proud of that. We have some wonderful modeling of that in Alaska, where we have the most diverse city, the 3 top most diverse high schools in the nation. And we have a legal process in place right now that we need to reinforce and keep in place for anybody who's truly seeking asylum. We need to make sure that the resources are there so that that legal process can be accessed. It's very important for anyone who is a law-abiding person to find their way from the darkness into being a tax-paying individual, particularly if they've been here over 20 years. I will, in Congress, work toward a real comprehensive immigration policy. Thank you.
And I think Rich Maurer has a follow-up question. Rich?
Yeah, Representative Mr. Young, you used the word this is the big enchilada coming. Was that intentional?
No, and you know that, Rich. I watched you over the years attack Ted Stevens, and you attacked me all the time. It was not intentional. That is the term, the big one. That's a big problem.
Am I like the national media to you?
Ms. Galvin?
I just wanted to comment, while that may not have been intentional, I think it lends itself to, kind of where we're comfortable speaking. I know that he's also used the term wetbacks in the recent past. And there's just no place for that anymore. This is 2018, where we need to use language that is appropriate, that respects each and every individual, and that models that we're civil.
Mr. Young, is there anything you want to?
Well, it's amazing to me that people can say things that are legal, dictionary-wise, and everything, and then be called a task for it. It's amazing to me when she brings up that issue. When the first people came to me were the Hispanic caucus and said, we know what you're talking about, Don. We know what you meant. You're forgiven.
All right, let's move on to our next question. It is related to immigration as well. We touched on this briefly. President Trump does want to build a wall along the U.S.-Mexico border. Congress has not provided much of the $25 billion the president has requested for that. Again, what is your position on building the wall, pros or cons? And let's go to Ms. Galvin for that.
I think the question here is why over the last few decades that we've been talking about immigration, we haven't found our way toward a true, full, comprehensive immigration program. Despite having been in office for now almost half a century, Mr. Young still hasn't gotten us there. I will go to Washington and really make an effort to work in a bipartisan way. I don't have a record of voting along the lines of Don Trump for the last 93% of the time with Don Trump. I will go there with clear conscience because I'm not going to be in anyone's pocket, and I've been an independent for more than a decade. I will go there for Alaskans and doing the right thing for Alaskans.
Mr. Young again on the border wall.
Well, the wall itself has to be built, and else we come up with another way, and I don't know what that's going to be. We can't afford that mass illegal migration into the United States and be America. And people talk about humanitarian reasons, etc. A lot of these people say they want asylum from persecution, but in reality, they just want to come to the United States. I can't blame them. This isn't just about a wall. We have to, and by the way, under President Obama, nothing occurred either, but we have to ourselves come up with a better way to allow legal immigrants into the state of Alaska, into this nation, in a shorter period of time. That's the reason they're coming up here, for employment, better security, etc., illegally. But if we had a better system and did it quicker, they would not be in that caravan.
Liz Ruskin has a follow-up.
Yes, Ms. Galvin, the question was, what is your position on building the wall?
I find it fascinating. I think that right now to put in that much money when our nation is still with a $21.5 trillion debt, I would look to solutions right now that we should be working on toward reinforcing our legal process that we have. Let's do that first. That makes sense to me. And I think there's a way for us to keep families together who are law-abiding and make our way toward really resourcing that possibility for a legal process for those who make sense and have passed through
We'll
that
have to leave it there.
become part of in the United States.
All right,
Thank you.
Ms. Galvin. Let's move on to our next topic. Researchers say that the Arctic is warming twice as fast as the rest of the planet, but we're a state dependent on production of fossil fuels. Let's talk about energy and climate change. Here's Ryan Deeren from Girdwood.
Candidates, what are your plans to bring more sustainable energy to Alaska?
Mr. Young.
Hydropower is the key to Alaska. It is an energy source that's clean. It should be developed. The state has been neglectful. This goes all around the state. That's a big one. Windmills, which I put in the concept view, are big. We're going to work on all forms of energy because the abundance of energy develops an economy and jobs for people. I will say respectfully, solar does not attract me too much until we develop a battery that can do the job, or batteries that can do the job, and that may happen in the future. But right now, we're still dependent on fossil fuels. But on Alaska, it could be all hydro if we were to develop it. And that's what I've done in the appropriation process for the state of Alaska. The state of Alaska put some money into it and then took it out again for the study, and the studies have taken too long, but we will get that done. That'll give this state the powers necessary to what I call refine our own natural resources to an added value.
Ms. Galvin, your position on renewable energy.
While we have to maintain our good jobs right now, there is no question that we need to look at renewable energy as a good opportunity for Alaska to expand and diversify our economy. And we do have some good things going in hydropower. In Kodiak, for example, there's 60-40 hydro wind. They did it. 60-40, they're 100% in, with the exception of 0.5% or so in diesel, just for that extra in case something shuts down. But we have some incredible opportunities, I'm going to say, not only in hydro, but in wind, in solar, in some cases where it makes sense, and also in geothermal. We're doing it. It's working. We have models of homes that we know will work, and prototypes. We just need to have a leader willing to make sure that the nation's investing in this, because climate change is a national security concern. It's the #1 right now.
We're going to give you 30 seconds for this next question. In an interview with 60 Minutes, President Trump said he doesn't think climate change is a hoax, but he added, quote, "I don't know that it's man-made." The vast majority of published climate scientists say it is. Do you agree that the climate is warming and that human activity is the primary driver? Mr. Young.
We are changing in climate. It's not new. 11 times we've had what we call ice ages. We're warming up, and I do not believe man is the cause. It's being used as an instrument to frighten people. And if you don't believe me, check out where the oil is and where the coal is in Alaska. That was not done through ice. What we have to do is learn how to adapt, figure out how it's going to work. And to say this is the #1 issue is not really listen to all the climatologists, which I happen to be acquainted with some of the best in the world. In fact, the president of one does not agree with what some of the scientists are saying. So, yes, climate is changing. Man's not the fault.
Ms. Galvin, 30 seconds.
Unlike my opponent, I agree with the 99.5% of scientists who say that climate change is absolutely related to human activity. I think it's critical that Alaska, where we are experiencing climate change, first and foremost, needs to have a representative who's going to ensure that we are adapting and mitigating these climate change issues that are certainly affecting Alaskans and our way of life. Thank you.
All right, we do have a follow-up from Liz
Ruskin.
Mr. Young, as recently as 2010, you said global warming was a scam perpetrated by Al Gore. Do you still think that?
I think it's a scam by those who present the fear tactic. We have to adapt. Are we going to put people out of work? Are we going to take care of poor people and not care with them? Are we going to take care of people that don't have energy? Is that really our idea? So I think what has been done is a scam. And I'll continue to stand by that because they're not only the 90% of the climatologists. I've got a group that says it's absolutely a hoax and have said why and gone back to the global history. And I think we all ought to do that instead of panicking and saying, okay, the world's coming to an end. I'm saying, okay, let's find out, let's solve the problem, but let's not panic.
Ms. Galvin?
I don't think it's panicking when we're listening to 99.5% of the scientists, and by the way, the Department of Defense report of 2017 that says climate change is a national security issue, one of the top threats. To me, it's just a way for us to say, okay, now we have a reason to invest in ways that are smart for Alaskans as we begin our diversification of our economy. And I think of it as an opportunity for us because we have the know-how, particularly in our Arctic Institute.
All right,
and I can't wait to help lead that.
Thank you.
We do have one more question on this topic. A new report from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change says a carbon tax would be an effective way to reduce emissions. A tax of $50 per ton of carbon released would raise the price of fuel and power, would also shock the market into adopting lower carbon solutions. What is your position on a carbon tax? And let's go to Ms. Galvin first.
Yeah, I've heard of carbon tax being one of the solutions as a way of affecting our behavior and our use of energy. The United States we have 4% of the population and we're using 19% of the energy. So one of the solutions should be for us to look at our behavior and use of burning fossil fuels. And I would put that on the table and listen to the experts and find out which lever is best when it comes to ensuring that we are making our way toward using energy more efficiently. Thank you.
Mr. Young, your position on a carbon tax.
I'm against the carbon tax. It just takes and transfer a problem to another person and actually make money out of it. It will not work. It's not the way to solve this problem. I've said this time and time again, and I'm against the carbon tax.
All right, thank you. Now we're going to give the candidates a chance to ask each other a question. You'll have 30 seconds to ask your question, 1 minute to answer, and then we'll also provide a 30-second rebuttal. Mr. Young, your question.
Well, I don't have any real questions with Elise, other than the fact in your presentation you talk about the Arctic infrastructure and the Alaska Congressional Delegation is not moving forward. And what would you do differently than Senator Sullivan, a member of the Senate Commerce Committee, and myself as a member of the House Transportation Committee, to grow investments in the Arctic? What would you do?
Thank you. I think that's a great question. I look forward to making sure that we have the investment that's going to keep not only Alaska and our longest coastline protected, but also that allows us to have the flexibility to get up to the North all the way through the northern region of our coastline for any areas of commercial work. It'll help lower our transportation costs. So yeah, I'm going to talk about ports. We know that we've talked about it for decades, and yet somehow we still haven't managed to get ourselves to get the sort of pieces of infrastructure that's necessary. But we need large vessel ports. In Russia, we have over 40 cutters. And just this year, we took off the table the funds that were to help ensure that we had more cutters here in Alaska, where we only have, I think, 1.5 or so. So I would work with our delegation. I'd work with Senator Sullivan and Murkowski to better lift up this opportunity, and being in the majority in the House, I think I'll have a great opportunity to make sure we have more infrastructure. Thank you.
Well, that's a fine answer. It didn't say anything. I asked you the question, what will you do different than Senator Sullivan and myself? This year, we authorized 6 icebreakers, 3 medium and 3 heavy ships for breaking ice. I've secured over $150 million to procure the heavy icebreaker, and we are appropriating $750 million for the next appropriation process for icebreakers. In fact, I'm the leader of mapping of the ocean, and the President just signed the water bill that includes a fast-track feasibility study, the Arctic Deep Water Port, and I've increased the opportunities for public and private people to get involved. So I asked the question, answered the question, what will you do different?
Actually, it's Ms. Galvin's opportunity to ask a question now.
Okay, there's no rebuttal on that one. Okay.
Well, he posed a question, so let's give Ms. Galvin
all right, sure.
What would you do different?
20 seconds.
Yeah, I think in addition to what you're doing, which is admirable,
yes,
I think it's time for us to move it faster. I think we should also look at the marine highway system, where we do have some vessels to increase those vessels and make that part of what we're considering as our national security protection. And I think there's a way for us to do that. I know that our people in Alaska and in the Southeast would like to see us do that. So that would be one extra addition. And again, like I said, working in the majority, I think next year it'll also give me an extra foothold there to make a difference.
All right, so your question, Ms. Galvin, you have 30 seconds.
Thank you. Don, you've been in office now for 45 years, nearly half a century. How is it that after 45 years of your representation, Alaskans have the highest health care costs, that our unemployment rate is more than twice that of the lower 48, that Alaska Native women are experiencing sexual assault and domestic violence at 10 times the national average? Is your loyalty to corporate donors getting in the way of your ability to look out for real Alaskan interests?
Well, Elise, let's keep what is in mind. We've worked very hard for many different health bills. I have voted against so-called health care, Obamacare. That's one reason that our health costs in the state of Alaska are so high. My health care itself, everybody says congressmen have a perk. They don't, at least keep that in mind. My premiums went up 247%. It's a failure. We have tried before, and were unsuccessful because President Obama didn't want to do it, try to get a new Obamacare, or we call it congressional, bipartisan. This was not a bipartisan bill. And so we're working very hard to get that done. We'll continue to do it. I can't solve all the problems. Some of the violence we have in the state is really related to opioids, which we're working on. It's related to alcohol, which we've been fighting all my life and my career. And I have tried to solve these problems. Yes, I can't solve all of them. It takes a joint effort. It takes, I hate to say it, a village to make a city. And I'm working very hard to get this done. I can't do it all, and you can't either.
30 seconds, Ms. Galvin.
Well, maybe what we need is a fresh voice, because I think there are some fires that can be put out right now when it comes to health care. Number one, pharmaceutical costs. I don't understand why you voted against Medicare negotiating to lower pharmaceutical costs, number one. Number two, why can't we buy pharmaceuticals across the country line out of Canada or where we can safely in Europe? I think that there are some places where we can actually put out the fire. Also, what about allowing Alaskans to work with other states across the state in these exchanges so that we can grow our pool of applicants and lower the costs?
You're singing my song, is what I've been saying. We have to be able to cross lines. We have to be able to pool our things, pre-existing conditions. This is going to be the new bill. It's not under the Obama legislation. Yes, pre-existing are there, but it's not It is not in Obamacare. We have to revamp that, and we can do that. I'm not happy with any of the high cost in Alaska. I'll tell you, that has to be addressed, but it's also on the state level. Across state lines is a state issue. We have one insurance person in this state right now, but that's controlled by the state. It's not controlled by the federal government.
Ms. Young, that's time. And that does bring us to our next question we had on our list. It is about health care and what to do about it. The polls are showing that health care is one of the leading concerns for Americans in this upcoming election. A recent Kaiser Family Foundation poll revealed that elements of the Affordable Care Act are more popular than ever nationally, and that Americans say insurance coverage is one of their top concerns. Let's get specific now. What is your solution to improving health care coverage and the cost involved that's affordable to consumers and taxpayers? Let's go first with Ms. Galvin. Please be specific. What would you propose doing?
Yeah, like I said, I was pretty specific earlier. We need to lower the costs of pharmaceutical drugs. That can get done today. There's no reason that we aren't allowing our pharmacies to purchase pharmaceuticals in Canada or where it's safe in European countries. That's a law that should have been passed, and you've had many years to take care of that. Secondly, there are ways to allow us to practice that fair market practice, which most of us do when we have a big buy. We have a huge buy in Medicare, and we need to allow Medicare to negotiate for lower prices. Don Young voted against that. Number three, like he alluded to, working with other states across state lines so that we can grow our pool. We must protect those with pre-existing conditions, no questions asked. Don Young voted against that 56 times. We have some work to do, and I can't wait to be that fresh voice for Alaska, ensuring that someone is looking out for just Alaskans, not special interests.
That's time, Ms. Galvin. Mr. Young, specifically, what would you propose doing?
Let's make it perfectly clear that, my opponent keeps wanting transparency, solving health care problems, but the bill I voted against was Nancy Pelosi's bill, and she brought it out 9 days after she was sworn in. There had been no hearings. There was no real input in it, like ensuring expensive costs to be taken care of in cancer, Parkinson's, and Alzheimer's. None of that in the bill. I will tell you, it was a disaster, and I voted against it because I've always voted against, and I will continue to do that, against Obamacare. It's what's hurt the health care. Insurance is not health care. Insurance is not health care. Health care, by the way, is the biggest problem we have in the state of Alaska because of cost, but we have to go back, if we're going to have it federally implemented, go back and rewrite the whole bill. And, I can't, like I said, do everything, but that's one thing I propose to do. And I can go through a whole list of all health care legislation I voted on. And it frustrates me sometimes when you think about this issue of pharmaceutical costs, when especially a pill was $100 and it went to $200 without any cause. We'll work on that.
All right. Rich Maurer has a follow.
Mr. Young, you were in office long before President Obama became president. What were you doing about the health care before then?
Well, Rich, I know that wasn't the big issue at that time. It was not the big issue. And we had other issues. I represent the state of Alaska and issues that affect Alaskans. And my job is to make sure I take care of communities and individuals at their request. And you have to keep that in mind. That was not the big issue until Obama passed it. And when they passed it, there was no input from anybody on our side of the aisle or even the medical industry. The only people who supported it was the insurance companies. So that's where I was. It wasn't the biggest issue on the forefront.
Let's stay.
I just wanted to comment that in Alaska, we do have a model that is working well. And that needs to be brought to Washington and put on the table. May not look exactly like that, but we have a NUCA model here through the Alaska Native Tribal Health Consortium and South Central Foundation, and it's serving more than 100,000 Alaskans, 25% of our veterans. We have better wellness outcomes. It's very efficient and effective at half the cost as what the rest of us are paying. And I think we ought to be able to buy into something like that, where it's working well. And that's one idea that I'll take to Washington when it comes to health care.
I have a comment.
All right, and then we have a follow from Ms.
Well, I have
Ruskin.
a comment.
Yes.
Because she made a statement. I agree with you on NUCA. But I sent a letter to Obama on May 29, 2009, asking him to take and follow that model. They never responded to anyone. I sent again another letter on February 4th to the president, asking him to follow that model. So when you say this is a new idea, this is an old idea. Just that we had a president that didn't believe in the things that work.
Liz?
Ms. Galvin, the NUCA model, it's basically a treatment model or an organizational model, and it is working in Alaska because the federal government is paying for it. So is your call for extending the NUCA model, are you really just saying single-payer health care?
Okay, so the NUCA model does receive funds from Indian Health, from veterans, from Medicaid, Medicare, and some grants. I appreciate that. And
primarily.
And it's also inclusive of primary care, mental health care, dental, vision, some specialty when needed care. And like I say, it is delivering this system at half the cost. So if our work is to lower the cost for all Alaskans, why wouldn't we consider at least allowing us to buy into a program that's working? So I'd like to start that conversation, absolutely. And
right.
I think it's important that we recognize
Okay, we have to
that
leave
I'm
it
not,
there, Ms. Galvin.
Okay.
Thank you. Mr. Young, would you like to follow up?
I'm not for a single-payer system. I wrote these letters because if you're going to have a federal system, this was the model that should be followed. I am now hearing from people that they want Medicare for everyone. The only way you can pay for that is cut out Social Security and Medicaid. That's what we have to think about. Do we want to do that? I don't think so.
All right, thank you, candidates. Let's move on to our next topic. The hearings to confirm Brett Kavanaugh to the U.S. Supreme Court divided our country, and there has been discussion before and since that about further investigation and possibly impeaching the new Supreme Court justice. If you are elected, would you join or oppose those efforts, and would you consider impeachment? Mr. Young.
Absolutely not. No impeachment. I've said this before. If they want to have an investigation, if they were in the majority, and I doubt that, if they were in the majority, that's their prerogative. But I will not be part of it.
Ms. Galvin.
I think that it's, we haven't seen how he's done. I think that clearly he failed his interview. I appreciate that. I agree with Lisa Murkowski that he hasn't shown that he can be civil or have a temperament that to me would make sense or be worthy of somebody of a lifelong position. I agree with Lisa Murkowski with that. But that said, that's done. And so now it's time for us to think about looking at how he behaves at this point. He's in. And I think it's important, though, that we consider and remember that that whole process was very upsetting. I think it was so political that it made many of us in America feel as though the Supreme Court, which should be held on its own, is now becoming political. We're losing trust, public trust, in what's so very important. And I think also women are afraid to share their story, and that's wrong.
Ms. Galvin, though, I'd like to follow up. The question was, would you consider, would you oppose any move to impeach the new Supreme Court justice?
I would need more information at this point. I would want to see how he behaves in his new position.
Well, what does that mean?
So at this point, I would not
rulings?
impeach.
Are you talking about his court rulings
or remove him.
or his personal behavior?
As a Supreme Court judge, I would want to see how he behaves before removing him from that position. I think to get in the mud of impeaching him right now, I think is just would be too fracturing for our nation.
The rhetoric during the confirmation hearing of Mr. Kavanaugh was high on both sides. Stephanie Drescher from Girdwood has this question related.
Candidates, earlier this month, the President of the United States said this is a very scary time to be a young man in America, but that women are doing great. Do you disagree or agree with this statement, and why?
Ms. Galvin.
Can
we paraphrase the question? Was she said that earlier the President of the United States said it is a very scary time to be a young man in America, but that women are doing great. Do you agree or disagree with the statement, and why? Ms. Galvin.
This is one more example where the President, unfortunately, is emboldening hate behavior, and I don't think it's appropriate. I think it's better maybe to look at the data. We know that women are not making equal pay for equal work, for example. We know that women feel as though our stories are not heard or listened to. We know that women are suffering from domestic violence and sexual assault in Alaska, especially our Alaska Native women, by 10 times the national average. If I'm going to be a representative here in Alaska, believe me, I'm going to talk about how women are truly experiencing life, because it's important that we have someone at the table looking at things like health care, particularly for women, and jobs, and making sure that we have equal access. We are doing a lot, and we are multitasking well, and we need to also have those in leadership representing us. We have 19.2% of women in the House of Representatives.
All right,
I think we
you.
need to boost those numbers.
Thank you. Mr. Young,
Question?
The question was, candidates, the president said it's a very scary time to be a young man, but that women are doing fine, they're doing great. Do you agree or disagree, and why?
Well, let's put it this way. I think everyone is equal. In my office, I have 4 women, 4 men, and they all get equal pay. And I'm quite proud of that. I've always worked to make sure if you can do the job, you're going to get paid the salary. And I think we all should have that example. I think it's part of it. It works real well. And there should be no division. When he said the part about a young man should be frightened, I think what we should think about instead of that, but applies to all of us, the concept of innocence until proven guilty has been lost in many cases. So we have to start thinking about it if we want the America that we believe in. You're innocent until proven guilty.
The midterms are less than 2 weeks away, and no one knows what will happen with the makeup of the House. If there's a move in the House to impeach the president, where do you stand, Mr. Young?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. No one's shown me where he's done anything wrong. It won't get anywhere, number one. Impeachment, maybe we can indict, but it'll be impeached by the Senate. Maybe that's backwards, but the Senate has to vote, and it's never happened. And so I'm going to say absolutely not. This country's got other challenges and other problems. And for those who are anti-Trump people, that's fine, but you're not helping the country at all.
All right, Ms. Galvin.
Yeah, well, we're not pleased with some of his behavior and tweets and the way they're affecting us and our tariffs, our trade wars that have begun. That doesn't mean we impeach. I think it's very important that we wait for the Mueller case to complete its work. I will definitely consider that information before making any sort of a judgment around impeachment. For now, we need to uphold our American system and make sure that we have checks and balances that are appropriate. That's what makes Americans feel proud and grateful to be part of this nation, is when we ensure that we have due process. Thank you.
All right, it's time now for the candidates to once again have the chance to question each other. And Ms. Galvin, you are first this time.
Okay, thank you. Don, you have a 12% lifetime rating from the Alliance for Retired Americans for protecting seniors and elders. Recently, your partisan boss, Senator McConnell, stated that your party will vote to cut Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid to pay for your corporate tax giveaway plan. Given your anti-senior voting record, how can working families and older Alaskans count on you to protect their earned retirement benefits in Congress?
Well, Elise, it's strange you would use something like that. Here I have a picture of myself receiving an award and a prize called the Senior Citizen Thank You for Protecting Medicare and Social Security. I just received that. I am a senior citizen. I'm not senior than you are. I'm a senior citizen, and I protect the seniors. I protect the Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid. Always have, always will. And to have you say that and have the media on your ads say that is just, frankly, it's a campaign. That's all it is.
Ms. Galvin, do you have any rebuttal?
Well, I would just say that I've been endorsed by Social Security Works and the Association to Preserve and Protect Medicare and Social Security for good reason. And I think it's important to look at the voting record as a voter in Alaska. And I hope that you'll do that. And I think it's very important.
Apparently I already have.
Mr. Young, it's now your turn to ask a question of Ms. Galvin.
You know, Elise, I hear a lot on your ads and everything, Ace, but I have to find a question. One of it is, you in fact have your ads and yourself, and I've never heard you say anything about the vets, about how you support the vets, what is going on and how you can help them. We are I'm a vet, and I've worked very hard to upgrade the VA. I've done everything I can and will continue to do it. But are you ignoring the veterans of Alaska?
I'm glad you asked that question. Veterans in Alaska are very important. In fact, 1 out of 3 of Alaskans are either a vet or they're a dependent of vets. They've risked their lives for us. And yet, right now, they struggle deeply. Even though you've been in office for 45 years, I think that there's a lot of room for us to grow when it comes to protecting vets. I happen to know already, I've met firsthand with Dr. Ballard at the Veterans Clinic, and I've also met in Fairbanks with the all-day homeless vets program. And it's clear to me that we have a lot of work to do to make sure that our vets have access to housing, jobs, first consideration of jobs, and the sort of mental health care that I think is absolutely necessary for each and every individual who gave up their life for freedom. Thank you.
My record speaks for itself. I built the top-line VA facilities in Alaska under my watch. I fought for every Veterans Act as a veteran. They deserve it in our health care programs. I've worked and raised their salaries every time, the retirees. I bought the F-35s, the Fairbanks. I have funded the National Guard slots from Bush, Alaska. I got the language for the SB 8A contracting set aside. I have been and am a vet, and I work with the vets. And it just struck me, the question was, and you didn't answer, why aren't any of your ads or any of your presentations talking about benefits for vets?
Move on.
Let's move on to the next question.
Turning now to subsistence, we recently spoke with Vera Lincoln of Aniktuvik Pass. She originally asked this question of the governor candidates, but we thought it applied well here as well.
How well do you know about our subsistence use rights and our protections for the future generation, and also our battle today for but with the state and the federal regulations? Thank you. Thank you very much.
So I'd like to clarify that question. What can Congress or the federal government do to clarify the confusing laws around subsistence in Alaska? Mr. Young.
That's one of the hard ones. Subsistence came from me, not the idea of subsistence, but the word, when we passed the National Lands Act itself. My idea, and will continue to be, that the person in the rural area has priority rights over someone from the urban areas, and if there is no other choice. And how Congress can do this will be very difficult. A lot of people personally will say there's no rule to be in the state anyway. I personally think the state should manage all fish and game. I think they can do it cooperatively with the native corporations and native villages. I believe it can be done. In fact, I've been working very close with Otna now to set up a program. I've had a little problem trying to sell it in the state because the state doesn't want to do that. But the game itself has to be managed. Primarily, the federal government's role is to get out of the way. Let the state do it with the cooperation of the natives, and that can be done.
All right, Ms. Galvin, what can Congress or the federal government do to clarify the confusing laws around subsistence in Alaska?
I think it's really important that we work together more to ensure that subsistence rights are in place. And we have some examples of where we're really truly recognizing sovereign tribes as sovereign tribes, like they should be government to government. That's important. There's some examples in the court system, in education, it's coming along, and in healthcare where we're doing that. And certainly it's very complicated when it comes to lands because Alaska is very unique. In the state, if we had the constitutional amendments with subsistence preference, that would make a big difference. And it would help alleviate a lot of this confusion. I'm very concerned. I'm concerned about the Sturgeon case and much more because it's going to affect Alaskans' way of life. And it's important that we really, truly get ourselves wrapped around how we can best protect Alaskans' way of life. Thank you.
Our next question, the lack of law enforcement in rural Alaska communities is an ongoing problem. Should tribes here be able to exercise tribal police powers in the villages? Ms. Galvin.
Law enforcement is a big issue from what I've heard traveling throughout the state over the last 10 months, not only in urban, but particularly in rural Alaska, where we have entire communities still in 2018 without a single law enforcement officer of any sort, VPSO or state trooper coverage. And the chiefs are so upset by this. And I think it's really important that the federal government considers this as an emergency when we have entire communities without any public safety officer. And yet we know that we have the highest number of women suffering from domestic violence and sexual assault. We can and we must do better. And that's why I hope that you'll vote for me come November 6th.
Mr. Young.
This is an issue that's a social issue in all our villages. You can't put enough troops in the villages. It's be darn near impossible. How do we solve it? I want to give them the authority to arrest in the village any of their tribal members and to charge them and to prosecute them in the sense that they have better feeling for it. Some people say you can't do that under the state constitution. That may be true, but we have to do something. I was a mayor of Fort Yukon, and we had a real good rule. You did something wrong, you serve a little time, not in jail, but helping those people that you harmed. That worked. Now you can't do it. This is all state issues, by the way, because the federal government doesn't have a role, it's the state. And we ought to be able to solve it together within the state and with our native corporations and our villages. And there's been work done on that, and I'll continue to do that. But the federal government cannot solve this problem itself.
I believe Rich Maurer on our staff has a follow-up.
Thanks. This is, I guess, for both of you. Should tribal police be able to arrest non-members? In other words, someone who comes into a village who happens to live there, maybe lives there for 20 years, but is not a member of that particular tribe or that particular village. Should they be subject to arrest?
Ms. Galvin, why don't you take that first?
Yeah, I think that's an interesting nuance to the problem, and I do think that we have good examples of a sovereign court system working in some places, and we need to better resource that so that they can work on those problems and figure out what's best for the local communities. I absolutely believe that we need to first listen to the local tribes and their native corporations as they're working together within each region and resource what's necessary. That would be our job, is to listen and then take that back to Washington.
Mr. Young.
Mr. Young.
I personally don't think that anyone's exempt of the law. That's simple. If there's a law broken, anyone should be arrested. And that's the simple answer to the question, and that's the way to do it.
So it doesn't matter if they're a tribal member
It makes
or
no
not.
difference. If the law is broke, it's broke.
Right.
There's no immunity.
Thank you, candidates.
All right, the regulation, the federal regulation that recognizes Alaska tribes can place land into trust with the federal government is currently on hold. Do you believe Alaska tribes should be allowed to place land into trust to create Indian country? Or do you believe ANCSA, the Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act, extinguished that type of tribal jurisdiction over land in Alaska? Mr. Young.
Well, this is an issue that's been on my forefront for a long time. I believe that the ANCSA works. It's the only area where you have the highest economic input to any one state by an ethnic group. It works. We have outsiders that come into certain villages and say you want to put your land into trust, and because of the dual land ownership, the service belongs to the village, the subservice belongs to the corporation. By doing so, putting it into trust, only the government can let you do certain things and not certain things. So I don't like the idea. I will not support that. There's small cases where there's a building or I would say an institution or something. I would support that. But as land itself in a village, no.
Ms. Galvin.
Yeah, I think it is a very complicated issue, and I do agree that what's happened in ANCSA is supposed to kind of have lined it out for us. I think it's important that we listen to if there's going to be an exception to the local community and then take heed there. And that's where I would be.
All right, thank you, candidates. There's another issue on the ballot, and it's not a congressional issue, but it does affect all Alaskans. That's Ballot Measure 1. Now, along with deciding which one of you will represent Alaska in the House of Representatives, voters will also be deciding on this big issue, Ballot Measure 1. Supporters say it would protect our vital salmon habitat. Opponents argue it would bring resource development and construction projects to a grinding halt. Please tell us where you stand on this issue and why. And I've lost track as to who should be next.
I think it's Ms. Galvin.
Ms. Galvin is
yes.
next, yes.
Yeah, well, this is a state issue, and I've said from the get-go, it's on the same ballot that I'm on. I think it's inappropriate to tell voters how to vote. That said, I'm happy to discuss salmon habitat and how important it is, and how important it is also to have economic development near our waterways, and to have that possibility for us to sit at a table, negotiate, and make sure that we can still develop, but at the same time make sure that our way of life is protected, particularly as we know that we are experiencing deep concerns when it comes to our salmon runs lately. I know that we have a really unique situation where in Alaska we're the only ones not a part of the coastal management program. The only coastal state not within this particular important way of adjudicating and dealing with these sorts of issues. So I look to bring that back. The Alaska Coastal Management Program, where we will have experts and local input at the table, ensuring that everything is protected while we still develop. Thank you.
Mr. Young, where do you stand on Ballot Measure 1?
Did I hear an answer? I don't think I heard one, but I'm voting no. Absolutely no. It would take away the Statehood Act itself. It would take away the corporate lands, the native corporate lands under Alaska Native Lands Act. This bill is a way to try to take Alaska away from Alaskans. That's the answer you want. As far as the salmon go, we have to go beyond the land mass. Put the money in from the state to research the salmon and why some are not coming back. Is it predation? Is it climate change? Is it poaching? Whatever it may be. Find that out and quit targeting the land-mass, because that's not happening in Alaska. Under Proposition 1, we in fact would no longer be a state. We'd be through.
All right, we'll have this next question. You'll have 30 seconds to answer. The retail giant Amazon just announced it's going to pay its workers, even part-time workers, $15 an hour. Some states have also raised their minimum wage. The federal minimum wage is $7.25 an hour. It hasn't changed since 2009. Should it, Mr. Young, and what should it be?
Well, you know, they talk about a living wage. I've lived through a lot of living wages. We raise it for about a year, it works well. Then everything catches up, so your buying power stays down. If you run a real minimum wage, you pass a wage that has the buying power today, that'll be the same buying power 10 years from now. That's a minimum wage, but you don't hear that. This is a political gimmick, trying to get people support. It does not help those that are not making more than $7 an hour now. It would help them temporarily, but it won't help them permanently. So if you want to do it big time, go ahead and have an indexing of it and then the buying power there so it would work for numerous years.
All right, Ms. Galvin, 30 seconds, please.
$7.25 an hour is not enough money for any family to be able to sustain themselves. We've got housing, food, and transportation to cover. And let's not even mention health care, which is the #1 issue. So absolutely, we need to increase that. It'd be nice if our corporations just increased it on their own like Amazon did, but still, $15 an hour, if it doesn't cover health care, is a really tough wage. And I acknowledge that. And I'll look forward to representing workers to get a livable wage. Thank you.
All right. It's time now for the closing statements from our two candidates tonight. We again flipped a coin before we got started this evening to determine the order for closing statements. Ms. Galvin, you will go first.
Thanks. Appreciate it. If there's one thing that I can leave you with tonight, I hope that you'll remember that it's time for Alaska to have an independent mind at the table in Washington looking after one thing: Alaskans. I'm very proud that I've been an independent for over 12 years, like 56% of us. It's time to end the partisan shouting and get things done. My opponent, unfortunately, in 2007, he voted against allowing Medicare to negotiate with Big Pharma. 2 months later, he accepted a check from Pfizer. This year, he was supportive of net neutrality until he received a check from Comcast, and then suddenly he was against it. I'm not taking a dime from corporate PACs because I'm going to Washington to serve people. 98% of my money comes from individuals. Which one sounds more like democracy? Which one sounds like Alaskans will feel heard in Washington and represented? Thank you.
Mr. Young, your 1-minute closing statement, please.
Thank you for the show, and thank you for the listening audience. I'm excited about this election. You know my capability, what I've been able to do. Even this year right now, I've had 4 bills signed by a president, signed into law, more than any other congressman. You keep that up, I've been able to do the job for you because I listen to you. Every piece of legislation, but take that back, 100%, 70% are Alaskan bills. The rest of them are national bills. I work very hard to work with you. I've had over 1,300 people in my office this year alone. You go through that list, I'm back in the state every 2 weeks somewhere. This is a big state. I'm asking for your vote because I am the experienced voice to get things done for you. That's my job. That's being the representative.
All right, thank you. This concludes our debate for the state for 2018. I'd like to thank our candidates for joining us, Republican Don Young and Independent Elise Galvin. Thank you as well to our reporters for helping us out tonight, Liz Ruskin and Rich Maurer.
Election Day, of course, is November 6th, and we encourage every Alaskan to get out and vote and make your voices heard. For Channel 2 News and our staff, and for the staff of Alaska Public Media, we partnered on these debates. We thank you very much for watching. And again, we encourage you to get out and vote. And again, thanks to the candidates, both tonight and last night. Have a good night, everyone.
Good night.
Okay,